Hello and welcome back, and that's right, we're doing another PS5 test, and this time it's a brand new SSD, the MSI SPATIUM, otherwise known as the M480. This is an SSD that's only very recently been released and has some pretty banging specs behind it. So just to put that into perspective, we've talked about some high-end SSDs recently, but if we look at the specifications for this particular SSD, we can see that the MSI SPATIUM really has a lot going on. First and foremost, the performance threshold. If we go to the highest capacity option, you can see 7,000 megabytes per second sequential read and 6,800 megabytes per second sequential write. That is some beast numbers there. I mean, it is worth highlighting that the IOPS may be a pinch less than some of the big boys at WD, Seagate and Samsung in terms of traditional read and write, or at least in the sequential sense or big data. These numbers do seem to go very well indeed. And this is an SSD from MSI, a big name in the world of gaming in terms of motherboard manufacturer. And we're kind of looking forward to seeing what this SSD does for itself. Remember, we are looking, one, at how well it performs against the internal SSD. And of course, in a later video, we're going to be facing this SSD off against some of the other SSDs that share its bracket, the likes of the Sabrent Rocket, the MP600, the X70. So, without further ado, let's get right back into that PlayStation menu. We've loaded up the SSD for the very first time there. And the first thing we're going to do is format this drive. This is where we're going to get the benchmark from the PlayStation telling us just what the potential read and write we could be looking at here. But I say write, of course, it's just read. So let's format the SSD and have a look. Okay, so we've got a reported 6,558 megabytes per second there in terms of read performance. We can hear the fan from the PlayStation just ebbing up there in the background. So let's go ahead and log into the main menu here on our PlayStation. And from here, we're going to be transferring the games for today's tests over. We're using the same games for our level 2 testing here. Again, we do have level 3 testing coming soon. I'm going to sort of talk about that in a little moment. But for now, we are going to be looking at the same games that we've looked at recently. Demon's Souls, Ratchet Clank, Resident Evil, Doom, and GTA. So, if we make our way into the settings menu here, scroll on down to storage, and there is our M.2 SSD storage there. It's the 1 terabyte model, as you can see there, the MSI M480 1TB. And as you can see, my console storage is looking pretty full. We've got quite a lot of data on there, and that is something that hopefully an SSD expansion like this is going to be helpful for. But for now, let's make our way into the menu. Let's go into one of the games that we're going to be going through today. And from here, we're going to move the data over from the internal SSD and onto that SSD expansion on the MSI SPATIUM. So the data we're going to be moving over is Doom, Grand Theft Auto, Resident Evil, Ratchet Clank, and Demon's Souls. That is the data that's getting migrated over, and this data is going to be moved directly over to the internal SSD here for the testing. These are the games we're testing. It's all of those versions, and again, the only PS4 game that we're moving today is Grand Theft Auto 5. So let's move that data over now. There's our 5 games, and click move. So again, if you haven't watched any of my other SSD test videos where we're testing as many PCIe 4 SSDs on PS5 as we can, I will remind you that what you're watching here isn't really indicative of the performance of this SSD. Now, the PlayStation 5, although the reported benchmarks for read are a little vague, they say it's around 5,500 5.5 gigabytes per second, or 5,500 megabytes per second. It's very early in the morning here, guys. Sorry about that. And I'm transferring it over to an SSD which has a write of well in excess of 5,000 to 6,000 megabytes per second. So this should not take this long. The reason it's taken as long as it does, I believe the PlayStation is doing some form of unencryption and re-encryption, perhaps some compression, some block checking, something to do with piracy, I'm not sure. But there is definitely a bottleneck in between these two systems when it comes to moving data to and from the expansion and the internal SSD. This will also be indicated at the end of the video when we move the data back. So we never really judge these videos based on this bit, because it's not very fair to judge it when we're moving the data back over and there's a bottleneck in the middle. We include it just to indicate that point. But for now, I'm going to fast forward from the moving process and then get to grip with starting our games and testing this SSD. Right, so the games have been moved over, as you can see there on that MSI SPATIUM or SPATIUM SSD. They are on the 1TB. We've got all of the games moved over. They've been taken off the console storage, and we can move into our first game, which is Demon's Souls. You can see there, living on the M.2 SSD. Let's make our way into Demon's Souls. Again, if you've watched my other videos, I appreciate it can be a touch repetitive going through these same games, but we need to look at the same games for some sense of comparative experience. We are going to be comparing this against the loading times of the internal PS5 SSD. We will be doing another big face-off very, very soon, looking at each of these individual games, of course. But for now, we're just comparing the M480 versus the internal SSD. Remember, the key thing we want to see is that it can maintain the same performance. We're not looking to see if it's faster. It's lovely if it is. What we want to see is that it matches the PS5 speed, or that if it's slower, whether we should be concerned. It should not be the case on a drive like this. We're not comparing boot time on this game from the XMB menu, because there's too many publisher logos to interfere with that. So for now, let's go into continue, and we're going to be utilizing the same save spots we've been using previously that are at the main hub world, the Nexus, and a couple of the Archstones being loaded. So let's do the first test now, comparing loading into the game directly. 3, 2, 1. And there we are on the Nexus. That felt just as snappy as always. Felt lovely and quick. We've got the Nexus world there, lovely and loaded. We're all in there. No frame rate drops, absolutely fine. There's no clipping. Everything's fine by my eyes. I think that's all good to go. We've got all the usual sort of stuff around here. The lighting's fine. Again, if there is a drop in frame rate here, that is largely due to the capture. It's nothing to do with the game itself. If it is the game, I will highlight to you, because I'm watching this being played live. But for now, let's make our way to the first Archstone, and from here compare it against the internal SSD. 3, 2, 1. And we're in the smithing grounds. Again, one of these days I will learn how to pronounce that. Again, the world has been built. Everything's moving as you would expect. Everything's fine. I'm hopefully not going to get hit by a boulder. But yep, seems to be loading up fine. The textures are fine. There's no low textures as we move into them with the camera. Getting nice and close. Everything seems to be running fine here. Yep, and then we can go to that window, check out the outside world, see how that compares. Again, the lighting seems largely the same. All nicely laid out there. We've got all the textures around us. There's no low textures there at all. If I go quite close to the edges there. Nope, doesn't seem to be any problems. Okay, let's make our way back to the Nexus, and from the Nexus we're going to load into a different Archstone. This is going to be one right from the beginning of the game. Where we have a lot of activity there, and again it was one of the regions where they loaded the game quite quickly to show how quick this game can be. So let's go back to the Nexus rather than load directly to it, and then from there we'll load into that Archstone once again. And again, if you've watched my other videos, you should have a good idea about how quick or slow this SSD is, even without the PS5 internal. But for now, we're going to load this up. 3, 2, 1. And there we are in the world. We've got the world loaded. We've got all the lighting textures. We've got the ray tracing there. Lovely little lighting effect from the sun above us. Again, while I'm running around here, we can have a little look at the surrounding area. All the little bits and bobs that are going on. Sort of crow's nests up there, and everything seems to be running how I would like it. Make our way back to that arch. Then there, we're in this area that's generally a boss area. And yeah, things are running fine. No textured slowdown, nothing like that to be concerned with. All running absolutely fine. I mean, this could go bad for us, but again, absolutely fine. No slowdown. All the textures are fine. Moving area to area, we're not seeing any kind of draw distance destruction there if we move out of this into the distance. I'm going to call that a win. Alright then, well, let's make our way into the next game, which is of course one of the early releases for PS5, Ratchet and Clank. Right, so let's load up Ratchet and Clank, and again we are going to be running the same two save spots that we've been utilising for other videos. We're going to be going from the start of the game and after the primary cutscene, and then we're going to be going a little further into the game during a large transitional rail segment, one that was premiered when the PS5 was kind of originally shown off, and how it takes advantage of these super fast SSDs. But when we get into the game here, we're going to go over that first area. So again, we're going to load up that first save there. Again, right at the start of the game. This is a semi-on-rail segment, but it has a lot of texture development. And it's also worth highlighting, if there is any problems, where you'll spot it on this is if anything pops into existence or low texture elements. So let's go in, load from the game. Let's load it here. 3, 2, 1. Lovely and quick, we've loaded into it, lovely and fast. That's exactly what we wanted to see. The world has been created around us. And again, we're going to be moving on this segment here. We don't have the camera control that I'd like. We can only really move there. But what I want you to pay attention to is the element in the background here. Now again, we are comparing. You can see the PS5 internal stuff. I can't. But what we're looking for here is to make sure stuff like all of those balloons in the background are being generated, all of the character animations, no one's doing T-poses from an issue, or that while we're doing this, we're seeing low textured graphics, because those are the things we're kind of hoping to avoid here with any kind of upgrade. We just want to know that this SSD can keep up with the internal SSD. And again, while it's doing this, I am going to be sort of throwing stuff around on screen to make sure we're keeping things active to show you this isn't like a non-controllable cutscene, but all seemingly going quite well there for us. And again, I'm not seeing any low textured problems. Anyone that watched it, I'm hoping the video's gone live, but with the Sabrent Q4, which is quite an affordable low-end PCIe Gen 4 SSD, that was a game that not only had slower loading, even though it was a PCIe 4 SSD, but also that is where we saw some of the earliest examples of low textured graphics being utilized within some of these elements. But for now, I'm totally fine with that. So let's make our way back to the title screen and load up that other save game. And again, that's that large transitional save game. So we can make our way into it there. Let's go in, and in 3, 2, 1. Again, should be very quick indeed. I'll move the camera around so we can see a lot of stuff that's going on in the back rather than the front. But again, all of this area here is on rail segment, but you do have control. As I see, if I move my character around left and right there, we have the control while all of these background elements are being built. And again, just a hugely graphically demanding section, this one. And again, we've got that control while I try and move it around underneath everything for a change. But again, we're moving into like the final part of this transition, this area here. And again, I'm not even going to fight anyone this time. I think I'm just going to look around. Just going to have a little look at the area, see what we're seeing. But again, that's the end of this segment. And again, now we go into a non-controllable cutscene, where for me, that's kind of where this segment ends. But again, that felt very snappy. I saw no problems there. So for now, let's come out of this and make our way into our third game, Resident Evil 5. Loading into Resident Evil 5 there, you can probably hear the disc in the PS5 spinning up there in the background. Don't worry, that doesn't affect any of the loading time because we're using the disc-based game. We've transferred all of the data from the disc onto the console. And from there, all it's doing is using the disc for verification. The disc will stop spinning very, very shortly. So again, we're going to be utilising the two save slots we've been using for a while. One is going to be Escape the Castle, the other is the Stronghold. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's go into it. Let's load this save. 3, 2, 1. Lovely and quick. I'll be honest, that felt pretty standard there. We're absolutely fine. There's Lady Damascus. And again, got absolutely smacked there in the back. And again, we're just going to go around, go into some of the open area settings here. Sort of scroll. She's going to keep walking behind us there. But for now, let's run into the other areas of the game just to open up. See, make sure we've got no slowdown as we transition. I know the lighting in this game is a bit low. And the original PS5 recording there was recorded on slightly different settings. But again, these games do still to be running at a decent little speed there with no problems. I'm quite satisfied with that. If you guys are, I think for now I would call that successful. And let's make our way into the next save game here. Let's carry on. Let's go back. So we'll go back to the title screen to keep things fair. And this one we're going to be loading later in the game into the Stronghold, where we will be running through a good chunk of the game just to see if we can force the game to do some hidden loading there. But for now, let's load in. 3, 2, 1. And lovely and quick there, we're at the Stronghold. And much like you guys can see, I can't there on screen. What we're doing here is the PS5 SSD on the left and the new SPATIUM internal SSD on the right. We're running through a large section of the game to try and force it to go into a kind of a silent loading there. Normally, if the game you're playing can't keep up with the actions you're doing on screen, it might have to do a forced screen freeze with a loading logo, or some of the textures will stop loading in as promptly. So what we're doing on this section is just to try and force the game into either those low texture polys, or so it can't transition into the high definition ones, or that while we're doing this, the game has to force a kind of frozen loading onto us there as we run into all the areas. I don't think we're going to hit that problem here as we run along. Again, sort of going through this whole open area, this is kind of, I believe that I would say the third quarter of the game there. As I go up this hill, look at the top left of the screen, and you'll see that little save logo there. It's not loading, don't worry. But again, there we are at the water area, and again, no slowdown whatsoever. I saw no low textures, and there's the merchant right there. I'm quite satisfied with that, and I think it's time to go to our second last game, which is going to be Doom Eternal. Now, for those that aren't aware, Doom Eternal is one of those games that was a PS4 game that was upscaled to PS5. The latest beta separates these games onto different versions, so you can play the PS4 version if you want, or the PS5. And you can see the PS4 version, the little icon there, I've made sure that the game is saved to an external USB. The PS5 version does not use any of those assets. It's a completely independent setup there, as you can see. So don't worry about it being on those separate areas. But for now, let's load into Doom Eternal and compare that save load of the internal SSD versus this of the SPATIUM M480. And we'll see just how they compare. Now, they should be fine. But unfortunately, we do have all these publisher logos that we can't skip, which is super annoying. But do bear in mind, again, that we're not including publisher logo in this whole load screen here in our comparison. It wouldn't be fair, because none of these, I would argue, are taxing the system. They are simply developers making sure that people get the right credit. So for now, we're loading in. We're not even going to include the online element there. We're going to completely ignore that as we make our way into Doom Eternal PS5 version and loading from the title screen here. And again, we're going to get rid of all of that. Let's load into our game. So for now, let's cut in and load the game in 3, 2, 1. And we're loading into the game. We're on that same area. I'm seeing no low textures here to worry about. Seem to be fine. Yep, it's going how I would expect. Again, great game, everyone. And again, none of those low texture problems. They're still running at that lovely top speed. We are using PS5 ray tracing enabled on this. So we are utilizing pretty much all of the key features of this that we'd like to see used. and it's running pretty well for me, still running quite fast indeed, and seeing no problems whatsoever. Everything's running top speed. We're seeing no kind of slowdown or any of the sort of concerning stuff. But for me, that's quite, I'm quite happy with that. I think for now, what we can do is make our way into our final game, GTA 5. We're not even going to need to cut out on this. We're going to be able to go straight into GTA 5 there. Go straight in, go into the load library, find GTA 5, and boom, let's load into that game. Now, on screen, as you can see, as we compare how these two games load, it's worth highlighting that this is the main thing we are looking at here. We want to see how long it takes the game to load GTA 5. Let's face it, the majority of gamers have played GTA 5. It's a massive game that's been around now for several generations of gamers. And this game still has the most interminable loading time. It is insane that this game should take this long to load. There have been improvements, but nowhere near enough on console. So for now, we're seeing how quickly this game loads on the console here, the console SSD versus the M480. And this is our last test as we go into it. I think the loading story mode gets to, I think, just under 50% before it puts us straight into the single player. And then we're going to see how far they go. But here we are. We've got Franklin there on screen. And I think they loaded, the MSI might have even been the tiniest pinch quicker there. I've done this test several times now. And, that still seems pretty good for me. I feel really bad about hitting that guy. That was not intentional. That was just an uncontrolled skid there. But for now, the game's loaded fast. And what we're going to do now is just go nice and fast to see if we can push the game into getting some of those faster, see how well it deals with some of the faster loading there as we push into the game and generate more textures that the game's going to require. We're seeing a little bit of a drop in frame rate there, but again, not end of the world. I don't think that's anything to do with the SSD. There might even be a frame rate problem as I turn around some of those corners with the capture running at 30 frames, even though the game, I believe, it might be running higher. I'm not sure. I know it's not running 4K right now. But for now, yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. I'm not seeing any concerns there as I make my way through the game. And I think that's enough for GTA. I think we can come out of GTA and we can start transferring these games back and go through some of the results that we've gone through today. So let's go there. Now we can go back into the movement there of games and move some of those games over while we conclude today's video. There is our games, moving back over from the SSD back onto the console storage. Let's move them over and summarize. So, what do we think? Definitely the MSI SPATIUM has performed exactly how I would like it to perform. It stands up just as well against all the SSDs we've seen thus far. We will be including it in our third tier testing, where we'll be looking at Borderlands 3 for PS5, Star Wars Fallen Order for PS5, in Rays of Light. We've got a couple of tests on that one, and we have testing with Spider-Man there. So we've got lots of tests coming in the next stage, which will include the MSI SPATIUM, so do stay tuned for that. But for me, this SSD has performed just as well, if not slightly better, than the internal SSD, and I can't wait to do further testing on it. We do have a full review on this drive coming soon as well, so stay tuned for that. But apart from that, if you've enjoyed this video, do click like. It helps me understand what you guys want to see. And click subscribe to stay tuned to more SSDs as they get tested. And therefore, you'll know which drive to go for when this software update comes out of beta. And you can pick the right SSD for you and getting more storage on your PS5. Thank you so much for watching. There's a link in the description to everything we talked about today and a bunch of heat sinks. So do check those out and links to NAS compares. But apart from that, I will see you next time.